Today I invite you to witness the last quiet hours of Wyndeborne Heights. Far below its foundations, a final door is about to close, and what remains afterward will bear another name and another purpose. This is a story of transformation and the cost of preserving separation among worlds that no longer consent to it.
Wyndeborne Heights stood above the tree line, looking down upon the land. It was high enough that the weather reached it early and was held there, with a seemingly permanent wind gusting around its towers. The heights did not blaze as it used to. Rust lay along its iron braces, and the gate teeth and bronze fittings had dulled. Leaves now gathered so densely around the walls that they needed clearing each morning. The work inside was quiet, but not reverent. Knowledge was held there. Magic that could not be allowed to roam freely was given form, tension, and boundaries. It was suspended, anchored, divided, and sometimes denied completion. The Magisters moved through the corridors silently, each one understanding that even attention itself could be disruptive. Speech was kept to a minimum, and gestures were precise. Even passing one another in narrow halls, they adjusted their bodies instinctively because the air itself recorded pressures. High Magister Ficeren did not hurry. Doors opened for him in recognition of his status. He never once had to command it. He was never its most powerful keeper, nor its most inventive. He was the one entrusted with knowing when something must be kept, revealed, or buried deeper. He stood in the eastern containment gallery when the first anomaly made itself known. The space rose high, its vaulted planes displaying sigil lines which had been cut and then deliberately blunted. Between them hung a lattice of hardened light, irregular and load-bearing, its strands wider at certain junctions where too much potential pressed together. The structure glowed red, and standing near it always brought a dull pressure to the chest, a sign of the magic seeking release. A junior magister named Larren stood beneath the lattice, his attention fixed on a particular node where two strands met at an angle that was clearly out of place. "It responded twice," Larren said when Ficeren approached. "The binding resolved, then resolved again from a second anchor." Ficeren studied the lattice. "Show me." Larren adjusted his stance, altering the harmonic he was holding. One of the nodes darkened, then brightened again, a subtle echo following the first response. "That pathway should only terminate once," Larren said. "It governs restrained alteration. There is no permissible redundancy." Ficeren knew this was important. "How long has it behaved this way?" "I don't know," Larren admitted. "I only noticed when the secondary response interfered with the primary containment. I thought it was my fault." Ficeren shook his head. "You would not have made this mistake." Larren was relieved, but it was soon replaced by fear. "Should I notify Master Helvine?" "Yes," Ficeren said. "And bring him here. Do not speak of this to anyone else." Larren hesitated. "High Magister, forgive me, but if a lattice is echoing—" "We will confirm before we conclude," Ficeren cut in. "Go." When Larren left, Ficeren remained where he was, listening to the faint hum that ran through the gallery. Beyond the tall windows, the forest swayed in copper and grey. Nothing outside looked disturbed. A flare of wild magic out there would have been more welcome than this. Helvine arrived quickly and took his place beside Ficeren, immediately scrutinizing the lattice. "You feel it too," Helvine said. Yes. Helvine lifted one hand, stopping short of contact. It's not instability. The structure is intact. Ficeren nodded. It is, but it is no longer exclusive. Helvine adjusted his stance and tested the harmonic himself. The second response surfaced again, undeniable. That anchor should not exist, Helvine muttered. This lattice governs transformation under denial. It cannot reference itself. And yet it does, Ficeren said. Helvine lowered his hand. Have any other galleries reported irregularities? I'm investigating that now. Helvine began to panic. If this is not isolated, then the Heights is beginning to lose its distinctions. This cannot happen unprovoked. I think it deliberate. Helvine glanced toward the windows. Do you think this is pressure from below? After a moment's thought, Ficeren said, I think this place is no longer able to hold everything in suspension. I need to find out. Helvine was shocked. Then we should consult the deep containment. No. Helvine pushed back. But that is why it exists. It exists because some knowing cannot be permitted to circulate even under restraint. It is buried because no lattice can hold it. It is not there for reference, Helvine. You know that. Helvine gasped, because it was true. Then what do you intend? I intend to see whether the failure is spreading, Ficeren said. I will act. He left the gallery and moved deeper into the Heights. He passed containment halls where other lattices hung or stood anchored to pillars and floors. Some were dense and sinewed, governing transformation and growth. Others were long and stretched, regulating correspondence so that distant things could not recognize one another too easily. Some lattices looked incomplete by design, holding temporal knowing apart so that sequence could not harden into inevitability. There were sparse, austere frameworks where knowledge was restrained by absence and not force. In two more galleries, he found confirmation. A lattice governing compelled will had begun to adjust its outer rings without instruction, tensing in response to nothing visible. A correspondence structure had produced a faint dissonance because distant anchors had brushed recognition and recoiled. In each case, the magisters working the space fell silent when Ficeren arrived. None argued or asked what it meant. They all just felt it. By the time Ficeren reached the council chamber, the other senior magisters were already gathering, drawn by the disruption. The chamber was circular, and no lattice stood there. It was a place for decision, not containment. Sylvain spoke first. It is not local, she said. No, it is systemic. Oren folded his hands. The Heights is reorganizing? Impossible. You make it sound intentional, Dalrian snapped, then fell silent in the face of Sylvain's glare. Helvine then noticed something. Multiple lattices are operating beyond their permitted scope. If this continues, restrained knowing will begin to align, and if it aligns, it will try to finish itself before it is ready for release. A hush fell. No one spoke of the obvious consequence, and Ficeren let it remain unspoken. We enact the final protocol, he said. Dalrian went puce. You mean the sealing? Yes. Oren nodded, slow and grave. It has never been done. It was written to be done, by those who understood that some failures do not announce themselves or submit to inspection until it is almost too late. Helvine's voice was fully panicked now. And the rest of us? You will hold here. You will take positions, stop working the lattices as instruments, and become their anchors. Dalrian spoke gravely. "But we will be changed." "We may," Ficeren said, "or we may simply be fixed into place. Either way, the Heights can no longer tolerate interpretation, and we cannot risk release." Sylvain closed her eyes.
"And you will descend?"
"Yes."
"If the place has begun to change, it may not permit your return,"
Helvine said. "Then I do not return." Ficeren knew the risks, and he knew the consequences. They all swore oaths to it before they went there. No one argued after that. The outcome was not negotiable. Ficeren left the chamber and took the stairs that led downward toward the center of the Heights. The lamps there were no longer pale and steady. Some were glowing brighter, and others were already dead. He passed junior magisters on the stairs, who all fell silent at his approach, questions dying unspoken on their lips. One of them reached out to stop him, then let her hand fall, uncertain why she had raised it at all. The lower passages were older and less refined. Wyndeborne Heights showed its bones there. Ficeren felt the change as he went. He knew things were being irrevocably changed and was no longer concerned with what lay beyond the walls. He reached the unmarked door in the stone. There were no sigils on it, no wards to impress or warn. Those who did not already know it existed would never even think to look for it. Helvine's footsteps reached Ficeren before his voice did, and he came to a stop just behind him. Ficeren reached into his robe and drew out the circular key of separation. Helvine inhaled sharply when he saw it. "So it has come to that," he said, not questioning, only saying out loud that which could no longer be avoided. Ficeren held the key for a while, feeling its familiar weight. "Join me, Helvine," he said, and pressed it against the surface. The stone dissolved into something else, shining and rippling like a clear pool of water. Ficeren did not think of what lay beyond. The protocols did not require that. Knowing had been denied even to those tasked with sealing it. Ignorance here was not a flaw. It was another layer of containment. Ficeren and Helvine stepped through. The darkness beyond absorbed his lamp's authority at once. Not because the space was vast, it simply refused illumination. Ficeren did not raise the light higher. He stood still and continued. The sealing took time. It was complex and exact, with each gesture following the last precisely. When he completed the final motion, the hum altered and became steady. The chamber withdrew from the building's awareness, removed. Ficeren breathed easy, and Helvine dropped to the ground, exhausted, while above them the change completed itself. Color drained from stone and metal alike. Sound flattened, and the mild season collapsed into something icy and grey. Every living thing either ceased to be or became something else. And then the voice spoke, and could be heard in every corner. "Orivath," it whispered loudly, and the word settled into the stone like a final seal. Above, the magisters had taken their places. Sylvain stood at a junction where 3 corridors met and lifted one hand. A junior magister approaching slowed, frowning, but then turned away. Laren stood beneath a lattice that had once sung with restrained potential and felt it quiet, denied further question. His desire to interpret fell away, leaving only the instruction to remain. Dalrian stood by a window and watched as frost and ice spread across the vale and crept toward the heights to consume it and consume him. They did not confer or flee. They just remained. Down in the sealed depth, Ficeren stood in a darkness that would never fully admit the light, and listened. He understood that he had not saved Wyndeborne Heights. He had preserved a separation. The voice had named the place. It had not named him. That was as it should be. "Come, Helvine. We have much ahead of us. I may be the master, but you are now the steward, and we must release the knowledge here." Helvine looked up, tears running down his cheeks, and nodded. Holding back now would preserve nothing.
The lesson of Wyndeborne Heights is that truth, once gathered beyond a certain weight, cannot be held still. Reckoning might be delayed, but it cannot be prevented forever, and those who obstruct release have only the choice of how much of themselves must be sacrificed in its name.